Welcome to the podcast series Europe is Working, part of the project towards shared interests between migrant and local workers. Stay tuned to hear about opportunities for solidarity between people who share similar working conditions in 5 European countries. This episode focuses on poor labour conditions in Czech super and hypermarkets and the possibilities for collective action. You will listen to a dramatisation based on interviews with migrant and local retail workers.
Supermarkets and hypermarkets. Every day we go through their doors to buy groceries and other basic products, and every day we try to get out and get on with our day as quickly as possible. However, we almost never stop to think about those we meet there on a daily basis. The people who work there. I must admit to never having paid any special attention to them until I witnessed a few unusual moments that I want to share with you. A few weeks ago, I entered a supermarket in my neighborhood in Prague, Czech Republic. I was browsing the shelves, choosing some vegetables. Well, you know how it goes. But I couldn't focus as there was someone constantly sniffling and coughing right next to me. It annoyed me a little. So I turned my head to see who it was, and I saw a middle-aged woman stocking the shelves. Her name badge read Elena, and not only did she appear exhausted, but she was obviously sick. Sorry, but are you okay?
Not really. I'm feeling proper rough, but my boss said I've got to come anyway. Probably for the best, as I don't get anything if I'm off sick.
Really? How come?
Well, you know, before I got sick pay, back when I had a full-time contract with the shop. But now I'm agency and part-time, so no sick pay.
So why do you work through the agency then? I mean, if you don't mind me asking.
Sorry. It isn't my choice. I've been working in jobs like this for 20 years. Back then we all had contracts directly with the company. Now it's all temp agencies and part-time. You know what was nice? I knew my colleagues. Now it's a different face every day, and I'm also jumping all over the place. Anyway, to come back to your question, sorry, I typically talk a lot. I honestly don't know. I wanted a certain contract, but they didn't want me to have such and such a contract. So here I am with a temp agency. Could it be because I'm old? Could be just because they want to save as much money as possible.
What do you mean?
I don't get any benefits. No meal discounts, nothing. But the biggest thing is lack of sick pay. Look at me, I ain't no spring chicken. I can't keep track of the amount of times I get sick and come into work. I can't help that they are always on at me to do overtime. Luckily, my kid is old enough to look after himself, but I see young mums working crazy shifts and I don't know how they do it. To be fair, not everyone moans like me. There's a Ukrainian guy I was on a shift with a couple of weeks back, and he said he's working as many hours as possible until his visa runs out. And for students, it's just spending money. They don't mind. Anyway, enough from me. I better get back to work before the camera spies me gossiping.
I kept thinking about the conversation we had, and it made me wonder if all the things Elena had said are typical and common for other retail workers too. I was asking myself, how would I feel in a job like that? And how well is it paid? So I started searching for information that soon led me to a social media forum where people were commenting on employment-related topics in supermarkets. Wages and working conditions were hot-button topics, and I was struck by some of the stories people shared.
There are tons of customers in line and we are understaffed. We can't take adequate breaks. And if you want to leave the cash desk, you have to have a replacement. So you have to wait until someone comes, and that can take a long time. It feels twice as long if you need to go to the bathroom or eat something. So you end up not drinking enough because the more you drink, the more you pee. And consequently, if you are dehydrated and hungry, you get tired and can't concentrate. If you don't focus, you make mistakes. On top of that, you have to deal with customers in a professional manner, stay nice and smile. It's a vicious circle.
During my trips to the grocery store, I started paying more attention to what was happening around me. Nothing special happened for a long time, but one day I overheard a conversation between two co-workers who seemed to be in a rush by the warehouse doors, both pushing hand pallet trucks. You know, those bright-colored little machines on wheels that let people move heavy loads.
Sorry, man. Move over. I'm falling behind. These goods should have been on the shelf already.
Yeah, right. The work they expect us to manage is mad. Have you heard that our supervisor tried the tracking wristbands yesterday, and he didn't manage to keep up with the targets? It was blinking red the entire time. I'd rather sit behind a cash desk.
Ha! That wouldn't help you much. There's a device that controls the number of customers you have, and it should be 75 an hour, meaning less than 1 a minute. Can you imagine? Okay, gotta run.
Yeah, see ya.
New technologies are a popular topic right now. They are believed to make our work easier and more efficient. But apparently there's another side to the coin. Technological progress can help us, but it can also control us. This and issues like low wages, declining professional prestige, and insecure contracts made me wonder what the workers could do about this. Do they support each other? Have they attempted to solve these problems? I was skeptical as to whether any of the employees would be willing to speak openly about topics such as these, particularly in their workplace. But once, as I was leaving a supermarket, I heard two workers talking during a cigarette break.
Oh man, finally. My first smoke today. Ah, what a relief.
Well, enjoy it as much as you can. It's probably the last one this shift.
Hard day, huh?
Business as usual.
Sorry, but I overheard what you were talking about before. I'm just wondering if there is any way to make your situation better.
Haha, if you come up with any brilliant ideas, let us know.
I didn't mean to be intrusive, but recently I've heard a lot about working conditions in supermarkets. I was even talking with some employees personally. I mean, it seems to me that there are a lot of issues to be improved, but I keep trying to think of ways of doing so.
It's not as easy as you think. People mostly solve their issues on their own. If you don't like it, you leave. Or try to negotiate with the manager, but mostly one-on-one. In a way, how can you imagine collective action if there's no collective? Staff's changing, we have different contracts, some are core, some are agency workers. We have different shifts, and we rarely have breaks together. And sometimes the only place we can meet is here. So what you are seeing here is us having smoke together. It's a unique historical moment. How lucky.
Some workers don't speak Czech either. I've been living here 8 years, so already have permanent residence and speak the language well. But some friends of mine from the city I was born in work here in supermarkets too. But they have temporary residence, and it's much more difficult for them to get a full-time employment contract and work directly for the company that way. In my experience, on the one hand it doesn't matter where you come from, since you share similar problems, but on the other hand, being a migrant worker means you face some limitation based on the type of visa you have. That's why so many foreigners work through temp agencies. My friends told me that rules are clear at their workplace. Czech workers sit behind the cash desk, warehouses are mostly full of foreigners with visas, and most low-skilled jobs are done by people without proper papers.
Okay, time to get back to work. If you want to know more, you can contact my friend who is trade unionist here. I'll write her number for you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I didn't waste any time. I called the number the worker gave me right away, arranging a meeting with Jana, a labor union representative.
The power of unions is limited by the multiple divisions in the workplace. The main one is type of contract. Besides that, there are a lot of other dividing lines, such as age, origin, or ethnicity. There is a high number of agency workers whose employer is the agency, not the grocery store, so our ability to protect those workers is almost impossible. Another fact that is typical of our region is that workers are skeptical of unions because they link it with communism and politics in general. They are also hesitant of joining unions because they are afraid of being fired. And on top of that, migrant workers experience not only the fear of losing their job, but also their visa. And all in all, there is not a lot of awareness of what we're doing, both among locals and migrant workers. Well, they all in fact experience the same problems at the workplace.
What about the same interests? Do they share the same goals?
Well, when I talk to coworkers, they often demand the same improvements, such as paid overtime and less multitasking. You'd be surprised, but even in the ever-changing conditions of supermarkets, some people create bonds between each other and discuss what bothers them about their work, and they feel some kind of emotional solidarity. But, as I mentioned, some workers are afraid to turn to unions, so they either try to solve their problems individually or seek more informal ways. There was a case in one supermarket where a few workers didn't get paid their wages, so they got together and contacted a group of activists who help people claim their rights in such cases. This is a case where solidarity went beyond the workplace, and thanks to the empathy that emerged, the workers were able to successfully solve their problems.
But how often does that happen? Isn't this a rather unique case?
Yeah, it isn't that common. There are various strategies hindering solidarity in a workplace. Outsourced work creates a feeling of inequality and injustice, and it leads to the destruction of solidarity between workers. Also, individualization is promoted in a workplace in a number of ways. In some stores, they have to sign confidentiality agreements forbidding them to discuss wages and bonuses with others. Another obstacle are the reciprocal stereotypes that local and migrant workers have towards each other. Needless to say, in such conditions, it is hard for solidarity and empathy to emerge. But I have to stress that empathetic behavior from customers' side is also of great importance to workers. There are cases where customers stood up for cashiers in front of managers or other angry customers.
The meeting turned out to be informative, but also made me pessimistic. I wanted to check if there were any successful cases of workers standing up for their rights, demanding better pay, or work condition improvement in retail. I found different cases of successful worker struggles in multiple countries. For example, in 2017 in Poland, workers in over 300 stores belonging to a large grocery chain demanded a wage hike, protesting against understaffing and high workloads. They used the so-called work-to-rule tactic, in which employees do no more than the minimum required by the rules of their contract and follow all safety and other regulations to the letter. In this case, cashiers carefully checked each product before scanning, causing slowdowns, and they would refuse to work during breaks or have unpaid extended hours. So where does this leave us then? When I think about the different stories I've heard from workers throughout my journey, the picture seems pretty fractured. Workers, regardless of their citizenship, share similar experiences of new phenomena in working life that are common and have come up because of recent changes in the global economy, like adjusting to new types of employment, outsourced work through agencies, increased digitalization, and so on. As Elena, the first worker I spoke to, said, the changes in this sector have made work conditions worse and made it harder to establish a connection with colleagues, and even disrupted the feeling of stability. Even though agency work suits some people, like students or Elena's colleague Sasha, who just came to work in Czech Republic temporarily, it has brought along a fair number of negative elements. Also, as the warehouse workers pointed out, digitalization is going up in the supermarkets, and it's bringing with it more control, more really tight control of worker efficiency, as well as the threat that they will one day soon be replaced by technology altogether. The workers in the supermarkets sometimes come from fairly different backgrounds, different countries even, and that contributes to different barriers that prevent them from solving their problems as a collective. As the unionists stressed, one of the prominent obstacles are the stereotypes workers have about each other. Migrant workers are often accused of stealing jobs, causing the worsening of work standards, and reducing the cost of labor. Well, on the other hand, local workers are likely perceived as less efficient and less appreciative of their job by some foreign workers. So it kind of goes both ways. But we need to look at the bigger picture. Some of the issues I just mentioned are the result of recent changes in global economy, like the fragmentation of the labor market, business pressure for cheap labor, and the undermining of labor conditions and workers' rights. To make things even worse and to complicate the matter even further, it's not only migrants versus local workers. Many other prejudices exist among workers in general. A lack of possibilities and the will to share each other's perspective reinforces the mutual misunderstanding. But as the successful Polish case I mentioned suggests, solidarity can be built even in unstable working conditions. But it doesn't just happen magically. It doesn't just come out of the blue. Solidarity is people together. And what it ultimately takes is that people learn to work together despite their differences. Workers should be colleagues, not competitors.
Thank you for listening. If you want to know more about the common struggles that migrant and local workers share across European countries, check out the other podcasts. How do Italian and migrant cleaning industry workers cope with everyday problems at their workplace? Come with us on a journey to an all-inclusive resort on the Bulgarian coast and explore the rising phenomenon of Ukrainian seasonal work at the seaside. Get to know what temporary workers in the food, cleaning and transport industries have in common in Poland. And come out onto the streets of Spain and join domestic workers as they struggle for decent employment conditions.